Hello everyone and welcome back to the VCO Esports studio. It's the month of May, we're coming up to one of the best weeks in all of motorsport, and what better way to kick things off than with the SRO esports community diving back into endurance racing. There's been no bigger supporter of potentially blurring the lines of virtual reality than SRO, and the IGTC esports powered by Mobileye kicked off this past weekend with the 12 hours of Bathurst. It was a really fascinating battle, but coming out on top was McLaren Veloce, and we're joined by one of their drivers now. Luke Whitehead, after a very successful 2022, joins us. Luke, how are you feeling? Still buzzing, I'm sure, after the victory.
Hello, Juna. Great to be here. Hope you're having a good evening. Yeah, as you mentioned, still absolutely buzzing. It's kind of been a blur the past couple of days, obviously. It's such a big event, and to win in a pretty decent fashion, obviously grabbing pole and all of the other crazy events that went with it, keeping it safe. And yeah, winning it was. There's no better feeling, really. No better feeling, especially Bathurst being such a difficult and such a prestigious race. It was great to cross the line in first for sure.
And I think a lot of that momentum that we've been seeing building up through 2022, nice to see the campaign start like that in 2023. Let's jump back in time though, Luke. Of course, lots of success in the last 12 months or so. How did you start in this sim racing journey? This is often how we start our chats here in the VCO Esports studio. When did you first start diving into the virtual world?
Yeah, it's quite a funny story actually. Like most people, I started from with lockdown. Prior to lockdown, I didn't really have much sort of knowledge about sim racing. I used to do real life racing, so I did about 8 years of karting and a bit of British F4 testing, all of that sort of stuff. And then obviously lockdown put pains to that, and I saw obviously all the stuff that SRO was doing with the real life drivers, and obviously F1 Esports did a lot of virtual stuff. So I was like, why don't I get involved? It seemed to be growing in the market, and it still is growing. And yeah, kind of just did sim racing from there, I suppose. Invested in a setup, and yeah, I kind of built my way up the ladder because to begin with, I wasn't too good on the sim, but worked my way up there, and yeah, I guess we're where we are today, and it's worked out pretty decent, I think.
And I think you're one of those examples as well that shows that in the sim racing world, you can come up pretty quickly, because starting just before COVID, I was scrolling through your social media just a couple of moments ago and just seeing that some of your list of accomplishments, even going back to 2021, it shows that there's a real pathway that you've been kind of charting for yourself. What was the first thing that you remember about jumping into sim racing, though, carrying some of those maybe tendencies from the real world?
It was weird. Yeah, I'll be honest. I mean, like, I think what people underestimate quite a lot is how much of a difference the depth of vision and the actual feeling is. It's so different because, I mean, when you're driving, you can modulate your pedals and modulate your steering based on what you feel. And obviously, when you're in a sim, you can't really feel that. And, if through your hands, obviously, you can feel it. But through, like, the rest of your body, through your core and through your buttocks, you can't really feel it. So it was a very weird experience to obviously try and get to grips with that. And obviously I actually started in front wheel drive touring cars doing sim racing. That was like the first of a series I did, which is very vastly different to what not only I'm doing now, but also from what I did in karting beforehand. So it was very weird to get to grips with it. And it took me quite a while, to be honest. It did take me quite a while, but I mean, the good thing is I see that from a lot of real life guys. They do tend to struggle to adapt to begin with, and then obviously once they're there, they are pretty good on the pace. So yeah, it is a very big difference for sure.
Now that you're firmly ensconced in this virtual world, I must ask, have you had the opportunity to jump back into a real car? Because I'm always curious what it's like making that transition back in the opposite direction.
I'll be honest, my forte into racing hasn't really happened since lockdown. I did do a couple of weeks back. I did the Jimmy Broadbent Team 87 final, which was obviously in a real life go kart at Buckmore Park. That's pretty much it. I've not done anything since then, unfortunately. As much as I'd like to, I just haven't really had the time and also the money. We all know how expensive real life racing is, which is obviously such a good thing about sim racing. We obviously don't have to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds to go racing in a year, and we don't have to pay for every time we crash. And obviously in sim racing, a lot of crashes do happen. So obviously it's a very good thing about sim racing, which I don't miss from the real world at all. I don't miss the money side of it. So it's yeah, quite pleasant, I think, for sure.
And one thing that you were kind of jesting about just before we went live is looking over your shoulder. There's plenty of things that you've won over the last 12 or so months, including what I believe are 2 rigs that are packed up behind you, waiting for you to figure out what you want to do with them.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll kind of go through it because I mean you can see it on my webcam. So I mean, right, over in that direction, I've got 2 Logitech Pro wireless headsets. Below me on the right is the motor, that steering motor that I've just sort of taken off to replace with a new motor that I got. Behind me is a Next Level Racing rig, which is waiting to be built. I am intending to build it soon, but there's a few other things I need to sort out first. Behind the camera, you can't see it, but there's a 49-inch ultra-wide monitor, which I've got, with a voucher. So I technically won that, technically. And then in my kitchen, in the kitchen, to dismay of my parents, is a playseat rig, which is fully boxed up that I won for winning LFM Pro. So in this house, there's probably around, I'd say about maybe £6,000 worth of kit that's just boxed up and not doing anything yet. And my parents aren't very happy with it because obviously I still live with them. I'm still quite young, so they're always like, Luke, get it sold, get rid of it. And I'm like, I'm trying. And it's everywhere. It is everywhere. And there's even some like keyboards and stuff in my room that I want as well. So it's no shortage of equipment.
Yeah, and coming to a Facebook marketplace near you soon, it sounds like, as well. Let's talk a little bit more, though. I think diving into the world of SRO Esports, where we've seen most of you, at least at the top level of sim racing, across multiple big teams. What was that transition like for you, coming, of course, into the virtual world, getting to grips with first a front-wheel drive machine? How did you start to make your way over to the more professional level of sim racing?
Yeah, it was quite difficult to adapt, to be honest. I mean, obviously, coming from real life racing, I knew how the competition was in real life. But coming from sim racing, it was always hard to get started in the big leagues because obviously it always seems a bit elitist. Even when it isn't, I mean, ACC is quite open. Like, kind of, if you're quick enough, you can race in the top leagues. It's not like you have to qualify and pay, and you have to know people to get in there, I guess. But it was a very big divide, at least in the early stages, like a couple of years ago. It was really a big divide between the small leagues that were kind of like where I started, and obviously SRO, because SRO is, like the big live audience, the name, obviously, I think that gets brushed over quite a lot, that it's the GT World Challenge Esports. And obviously GT World Challenge is the premier GT series, obviously Valentino Rossi nowadays racing in it. So it's got a huge worldwide audience. So for that, it was always very difficult to kind of get started because, I mean, it's nerve-wracking. It is nerve-wracking. I mean, even after doing all the real-life racing, it's something new and something that I'd never done before. So racing all these people from across the world and, see with all these eyes sort of on me was a very difficult thing to grasp. And it did take me quite a while to kind of learn to perform under that pressure. And I think it does get brushed over quite a lot because people kind of go, it's just a game. But there's a lot of pressure and there's like real pressure and emotions and whatever that you feel when you're doing it. And it was very surprising for me anyway, because I always kind of had a similar outlook before I started doing it full time. So
I kind of wanted to touch on what you've just said, though, because emotions are such a big part of athletics and sports in general. You joined up with R8G GTWR Academy, I guess, towards the start of 2021. Does that add to the weight of expectation? How does that also help, maybe, though, in giving you more resources and the ability to work with a bigger team to try and get the results that you're looking for?
yeah, it was big. I mean, I started off in a really small team, sort of 2021 throughout that year, kind of just building up the ladder, joining a couple of teams that would get me higher. And obviously, as you said, at the start of last year, joined GTWR, which was at the time the biggest team. And it was, it was tough because, I mean, when you're in a team like that, you do have the eyes on you a lot more because people kind of go, he's with GTWR, you'd expect them to be up the front because the previous year they'd won everything, like absolutely everything. They'd basically clean swept. So it's always a bit of pressure joining a big team because you have to you have to hold yourself in a different way. You need to obviously race differently, make sure that you're not getting these incidents. You need to hold yourself, not getting emotional, and try and I mean, I've always been quite an emotional driver. Stuff gets to me, particularly my own performances. I'm always my own worst enemy. So obviously having to get to grips with that was very difficult. But then the other side to the coin is that you're in a team where the drivers are certified winners. They win races and they win championships. So it always helps to be in that sort of environment because they've been through it. They've obviously had to overcome the same things as I have. So they're able to advise and help me build up and progress forward, which it's the same in Veloce, really. Obviously, they won SRO last year. So joining them, it's a lot of pressure, but at the same time, they're able to help mitigate that I feel, because obviously they can advise and stuff. So there's two sides to that coin for definite. But yeah, it's definitely very, very difficult to hold the emotions and all of that in together.
Let's talk a bit about Veloce as well, because making that transition at the start of this year, I would say that Veloce are also one of the biggest teams in ACC, but they also have a lot more eyes on them because of their, brand and the exposure that they get with some of their other affiliations as well. What led you to want to be a part of this new look McLaren Veloce squad as you headed into the next year of SRO Esports competition?
Well, it was quite an interesting sort of few months between obviously November and kind of January when I signed. GTWR disbanded late last year, early this year. And obviously I was driving for them and I had the full intention of just continuing with them. So obviously for them to disband was quite a difficult situation because at that time I hadn't had any teams kind of approach me. I didn't approach anyone else because, as I said, I was fully intending on just staying where I was. So I was in free fall for a good month and a half, which is obviously not an ideal scenario with SRO just around the corner. And luckily, I obviously had contact from Veloce. And even last year, they were kind of the team that you kind of look at and think they are extremely strong. So if you get the opportunity to go with them, you jump at it. Same as, Unicorns and BS Plus and Williams. They're those sort of four teams and obviously a couple of others as well. They're all the teams that you kind of go, right, I would jump at an opportunity to go there because they do win and they are strong. And obviously Veloce, as I said, they contacted me and we got it sorted pretty quickly. And it was almost a no-brainer for me at that time, especially given that I had no other options. I had no one else. No other teams were kind of approaching me. I didn't approach anyone else. So, I think the outcome would have still been the same if I had other options because they were a team that I always kind of wanted to join. But yeah, as you said, they're a very big team with a lot of different connections. And obviously the McLaren gig is huge. Racing for McLaren in SRO is a huge honour and a privilege. So yeah, it was a no-brainer to join. And I'm reaping the benefits, I guess, with having such good personnel and team around me. It definitely does. It does help. You can't really understate that.
I am a big believer in the fact that, especially in sim racing, where we spend so much of our time just online and try to communicate either through a voice channel or, in text, that being in an environment that you're comfortable and you're happy in is so important. So it's good to hear that even though you were, in your own words, in free fall, you were able to land in a spot that really has enabled you in this year to show some really impressive speed. We'll get to Bathurst in a moment, but let's talk about SimPro. Let's talk about the fact that now for 5 rounds this year, you're going to be heading out to GT World Challenge Europe races and racing in person against some of the best in the sim racing world. What was that first round like, especially, like you say, representing McLaren in that environment?
Tough. If you want my honest answer, tough. We went there. Obviously, going to Monza is a huge privilege. I tend to separate the race from the actual experience because obviously obviously it's the same event and they come together, but there are two very separate things and very separate feelings that I had with them. Obviously, the experience going to Monza, seeing the banking, obviously the track and the racing and just all the amazing places that are at Monza, and obviously all the not to mention the food. It seems unprofessional to mention the food, but I think I have to. Obviously, the pizza and stuff, I enjoyed it, and the culture. But going there just on its own, it was just a phenomenal experience. I absolutely loved it, and it was a huge privilege. As I said, going with Veloce McLaren or McLaren Veloce representing them was amazing. And then the race itself, was a spectacle for sure. There was so many people watching, and obviously walking shoulder to shoulder with real life racing drivers as well. Like I even bumped shoulders with Valentino Rossi at one point, which, was a big pinch me moment. But the experience was amazing. The race, not so much. We unfortunately got quite unlucky with the car and with a few incidents that happened. But the experience is amazing. And obviously there's 4 more races, including one, I think in about a month. No, it's not even that. It's like 2 weeks. So it's exciting. It's exciting, and I think it also is a great thing for sim racing in terms of it just opens people's eyes to it a lot more. Obviously last year they had Spa, the Spa Land event at the Spa 24 Hours, which opened people's eyes a lot more to begin with, and then obviously now that it's a regular thing at all the endurance races, it opens the real life drivers' eyes a lot more and puts a lot more of an audience on, not just from the people watching, the fans, but also the manufacturers and the teams, which I think is what sim racing needs, really. We really need it. So it's great that it's happening and it's publicizing our profession, I guess.
I wholeheartedly agree. I saw not the Fanatec Arena, which they have in Europe, the ROG Arena over in the US at the end of last year, and maybe the most fun thing that we did wasn't the real or sim races, it was the fact that we had CrowdStrike bring in a bunch of their guests and just sit in the rigs, and we got to commentate on some shenanigans as they tried to race. You're heading off to Paul Ricard in a couple of weeks' time, like you mentioned, for the next round of the SimPro Championship. Before we touch on Bathurst, though, you're also competing in the GT World Challenge Esports Europe series, where I did notice you're not running in the McLaren. And so this is one thing that I've always wondered in the world of Assetto Corsa Competizione. Yes, it's focused on GT3 cars, but with you having to bounce around a couple of different manufacturers, how difficult do you find that as you're building setups and trying to get up to speed in each of the cars?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a big thing. I mean, I'm not the only one, but there are definitely other people as well that bounce between cars quite regularly. And it does get difficult at times, especially obviously this weekend, or the weekend past was Bathurst in the McLaren, and tomorrow is Paul Ricard, the sprint online, and I'm driving the Porsche. So it does make that difficult to obviously transition because they are two vastly different cars in a variety of ways. And yeah, I think it does become difficult, especially because, as I say, if you prefer one car over another, but you have to drive a certain car, I know other people have that issue. So it can become very difficult. But for me, I mean, at least recently, I've not been too bad with adapting to it, especially with the amount of time that I kind of put in. I do tend to be able to jump more from car to car than was the case in the past. Because it is a bit of a skill, to be honest. I mean, a lot of people do struggle to jump from, say, the Audi to the Ferrari to the BMW, because again, they are difficult. They are difficult to adapt to. They're very different in terms of their personality, in terms of how quick they are at different circuits. And again, that's something else that gets overlooked quite a lot. You think the cars are quite close, but sometimes they can be quite far different, not just in handling as well, but pace. So it does become very interesting to see that change.
Let's talk about Bathurst then, and let's talk starting with qualifying, because
Yeah.
you were the only driver to go below the 2-minute bracket into the 159s. How hooked up was that lap? Did you have any more time in it?
See, my own worst enemy starts coming out when I did quali, because I always strive for perfection, and obviously perfection isn't always possible. So I can do a really good lap and then think, oh dear, there's another 3/10 in that. Just as an example. And obviously Saturday wasn't much different. I felt like I had a couple of tenths in it, or a tenth and a half at least. And it was kind of frustrating to know that I didn't maximize quali, but at the end of the day, no one did. It's always one of those situations where in qualifying, you can go quicker almost always, but it's about minimizing the losses across the lap and making sure that you get a lap that's sufficient, because at the end of the day, you could be the quickest car on track, but still qualify 15th if you don't get the lap right. You can make a mistake, you can touch the wall, especially at Bathurst, where it's so easy to make mistakes. You can just hit one wall and lose 3/10. It really is that cutthroat. So it was all about just getting that one lap in, getting pole, and yeah, I mean the lap was still good. The lap was still good. I'm not going to say that it was awful, because that wouldn't be fair, and it wasn't. So, but yeah, I think quali is one of those stages where everyone kind of kicks themselves a bit because they always know they have a little bit more margin in there.
I think you were still half a tenth clear of second place, so still
Yeah.
pretty decent margin at Bathurst, but pole position in endurance races never critical. Maybe at Bathurst it's more important than some others, but opening lap out of turn number one, the race was not going to be that easy, it would turn out, and 12 hours of fighting were up on deck after that. A bit of a fight back that we saw in the early stages as well, but the thing that really, I think, surprised so many of us, including the commentators, was the fact that you guys were running traction control 0 just because traction control 1 was slower. What was that like as a driver, knowing that you had to nurse the tires over the course of an hour-long stint?
Yeah, it was difficult. I mean, obviously, we established in the week running up to the event that traction control 0 was a necessity for us. We had to use it because otherwise we'd just be bleeding half a second. There's no sugarcoating it. That is how much we lost. So it was really difficult because we had to figure out a lot of different things. We had to play around with the setup to try and make it viable, because we did find that on the setup that we usually use, it was just borderline undrivable. We'd, nearly spin out of every mid to low speed corner, and in the high speed stuff, it would snap randomly and we'd have to try and control it. And it was really difficult because obviously we had a few days left by the time we made this discovery. So it wasn't that long, but it was long enough to kind of make some adjustments. And yeah, we had to heavily compromise the race setup, had to heavily compromise it. And fortunately enough, it worked for us. I mean, it was obviously difficult because, I mean, the first stint in particular, we had damage. Obviously I got hit at turn 2, as you mentioned. That then hit us into the wall, which meant we had more damage, and it was all on the rear, which is the worst thing you want when you're running no traction control. But yeah, I mean, it was very difficult to battle with cars, and obviously across the mountain where a lot of people did falter, we were very nervous because, as you say, without traction control, there's less margin for error. The margin for error is a lot smaller. It's already quite small at Bathurst, but it's even smaller without the traction control. But I'm just glad for the boys. We all kept out the wall. They drove really well. There's 3 of us driving. So for all 3 of us to not crash and not make any mistakes with such a difficult situation, I couldn't be more proud of all of us. It worked perfectly, I think.
In some ways, there's some big shoes that you're filling as well, because you're stepping into the defending champions in the IGTC Esports powered by Mobileye with what was a really fun championship battle in 2022, McLaren Veloce coming out on top against the BMW M Team BS competition. As you look forward to the rest of this season, though, what stands out to you? I think we're over to Kyle Army next in just under a month's time. It's a long season, and you indeed are fighting on 3 different SRO Esports fronts. How are you going to be able to keep this momentum going?
It's always difficult. I mean, as you say, big shoes to fill. A lot of pressure comes with that, and obviously, it's a long championship, as you said again, and we've started on the right foot for sure. But as well as that's a positive, to be leading the championship is a great thing. You obviously have a big target on your back, which not only means that you're going to have a lot of guys gunning for you. You also mean that people are going to be gunning for that car, making sure that the car is slower at the preceding rounds. Which I mean, at Kyle Army, it's already a decently weak car when you compare it to at least the quickest cars. But the likelihood is that'll be maybe how it stays, given that it was the car to beat at Bathurst. So it's always a difficult thing. And again, like endurance racing, particularly in sim racing, is a lot about the balance of performance. If the car is slow, it's slow. You're gonna struggle. I mean, we saw that with the Honda. The Hondas were, I think, 40th and below, and that's it. And when I tested it, it was like a second off the pace. And if you're dealt that kind of hand, you can't do anything. No amount of amazing driving can fix that. So I'm a little bit nervous. Obviously, the first round, as I said, we got given a car that was strong and competitive, and we maximized the event, maximized it. And you never know what the next race is going to hold. It could very easily be the opposite. But as well as you've got to be apprehensive and a bit anxious, you've got to be positive and just be like, we've got the momentum. We know that we're strong. We've got a strong lineup. All of us are all on cloud 9. We're all in a good emotional, mental position. And obviously the team around us is very good, very supportive. And we're all banding together to get the best result possible, which is all you can really ask for. So I think all of us are in the best mindset and best position possible. We've just got to make use of it and hope that the BOP and the car continues as it was at Bathurst.
I knew we couldn't get through an SRO-related interview without talking about balance of performance, so at least we can tick that off our bingo card. Obviously.
Always.
Absolutely. Outside of SRO Esports, though, Luke, where should we see you over the course of 2023? We've seen you be so busy since you've stepped into the sim racing world, and yep, you've got plenty to keep you focused, but I'm sure that's not the only thing that you're going to be focused on. Things like coaching as well. What all are you involved in the sim racing world?
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned coaching. I do actually do coaching, and it keeps me busy. It does keep me busy. Obviously working with the drivers that obviously request it, making setups for them, doing sort of videos and all of that sort of thing. I also work for Go Setups as well, which is kind of what I'm focused on a lot at the moment, like pretty much working myself off my feet. By choice. Because I do enjoy it. I do enjoy the technical side of it, and finding what works in each car is very fascinating to me. Always kind of has been, and so working with that, and obviously doing races outside of SRO Esports. The GT Omega Cup I'm doing with George Boothby, so me and him are obviously working together in that, and also doing other races like Low Fuel Motorsport. That's probably the most prevalent non sort of esports championship, I suppose, because you have daily races and you obviously have races every Thursday. But there's a few other endurance races as well, like RCI Endurance and LFM VEM, Virtual Endurance Masters. So there is a whole plethora of races that I'm doing. Mostly endurance, though. Mostly endurance. I'm kind of toning back a bit the sprints that I did. I mean, my worst habit last year was just taking on too many events and doing like 4 races a week, which is not ideal when you want to be preparing for SRO. So I mean, SRO is my focus this year, for definite. I think it's worked quite well so far, so I just got to keep going. And again, don't take on too much. That's kind of my focus this year. So.
Well, I'm not sure if you took on too much in 2022. It still ended up seeing you win the SRO GT World Challenge, America's Pro Championship. So sometimes being busy can be good. Before we let you go, though, Luke, I feel like, I'm sorry to throw you under the bus, we haven't discussed this previously at all, but a hot topic in the world of sim racing, and maybe one that you can shine some light on from a professional perspective, is the rise of cheating. It's unfortunately been a prevalent topic recently. As someone who is competing at the top level, is putting in so much effort, and like you said, is trying to make some money off of this as a full-time sim racer as well. What do you think about this topic? Give us some of your thoughts.
It's nothing new, honestly. I mean, for me anyway, in real life racing, cheating was always very prevalent in that as well. So it's nothing new for me, and obviously, it sucks. It does. If you want my own, it's just no point sugarcoating it. It sucks. Not just for us drivers, but also for the image of sim racing, because it does tarnish it. People kind of look at sim racing and they're not going to take it as seriously because cheating is so prevalent. I mean, particularly in F1, I think where it's probably the worst. And then you obviously have teams who are exploiting the rules in obviously iRacing. It does hurt the image. And obviously for us guys that are competing fairly and legitimately, it also hurts us more, because at the end of the day, if you put in your best lap of your life and someone is still 3/10 quicker because they use cheats, what can you do? And I think the worst thing is in some cases, it's hard to prove it. You can't say that someone is definitively cheating because it's so easy to hide nowadays. And I think that's why the rise is so, astronomical at the moment. It's because people are finding ways and people are getting smarter with it and finding ways to kind of hide it. And, it's just one of those things that like, I've just kind of accepted that it happens and that there's not much you can really do to prevent it. So there's not much point moaning about it. So like it's kind of an apathetic approach, but it's put my mind more at ease. Kind of like I can do the best job I can, but if there is someone in a pro team or a pro driver that's cheating, you can't do anything about it. It's just one of those things.
I like that you compare this to real world racing as well, because if there is a grey area in motorsports, people are going to find ways to exploit it. But
always,
now that you are starting to see some of these in-person events as well, you'll be heading back out to Paul Ricard. How do you feel about that as a way to try and, especially for these big competitions, for something like SRO Esports, some way that we can combat cheating through means like that?
But it does help, for sure. I think that LAN events definitely help because obviously people on the same kit, on the same rig, the PC is all the same. It's not their PC, crucially. And I think it really does help. Because again, as I mentioned, it equalizes the playing field. Obviously, you have intricacies with people using different setups or different force feedback settings. But again, you always have that. That's just it. But people aren't gaining their time illegitimately. Then it's all who can drive the fastest or who has the quickest car. There's nothing, there's nothing wrong there. So I think it's a great thing. I think it's a great thing for sim racing. Obviously, F1 Esports are doing the same thing, and obviously Rensport, they have the majors, which is the same thing as well. I think it's a great thing, and I'm very happy that it does happen. I think it's probably the only way you can definitively stamp out cheating. I think all the other scenarios we've seen that anti-cheats often don't always work. People still manage to cheat even when there is an anti-cheat there, which is really upsetting and a shame. But I think with regards to cheating and tackling that, I think LAN events are pretty much the only way to definitively do that. So I'm very glad that they happen.
I do have to ask, was the one at Monza your very first in-person LAN event?
Actually, it wasn't. I've had the privilege to go to a
Oh.
couple. I went to Spa 24 Hours last year, which was incredible. I'll be going to it again this year. Even if I'm not racing, I'll be going. And I also went to Sim Expo last year in, I think it was Nuremberg, if I remember correctly. So yeah, it was my third LAN event. And yeah, still a phenomenal experience. They never get old for me. Never get old. I'm still a little kid at heart. So anything like seeing real cars go racing past and hear them, it's still a massive privilege for sure. So,
What's the best sounding GT3 car in your opinion?
oh god, you've really thrown me a difficult question there. I'm biased because I like the Porsche. Although it's not the loudest, I like the sound of the Porsche. I also like the sound of the M4, but I would probably say the Porsche above the rest because I just like the sound of the flat six. You know, the naturally aspirated, or I think it's naturally aspirated V6 or straight six. They just sound really good. They sound a lot better. But obviously, you have the V10s, which you can't understate. You know, they are the loudest. I mean, I went to Brands last week, and my mum got her eardrums popped out. Probably, she was like, "I don't like the noise. The noise is loud." But yeah, it's yeah, great noise. But I think everyone has their own different thing that they like. But yeah, I mean, I think the worst thing in my head is that F1 cars and stuff are apparently way louder, which I can't even comprehend. So, but I mean, yeah, people always say that stuff, so you don't know. What about you,
I'm a
Arjuna,
fan of the
actually?
Lamborghini, the V10, but I think you are going to get in a lot of trouble for not saying McLaren, by the way, just so you're aware.
Uh, it drives the best, though. That's what matters, right?
The,
Drives the best.
especially on TC0 is what we found out.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, no, it's. I mean, I can be honest about sounds. Sounds don't make the car go faster, do they? So, it's the livery that counts,
Well,
and the McLaren Garage 59 livery, chef's kiss, best livery on the grid. So yeah, that is what matters. There you go. I saved myself.
you're saving yourself there. Luke, thank you so much for your time, especially in a very busy week over from Bathurst to GT World Challenge Europe Esports competition as well. It's been a roller coaster ride, I'm sure, for you, and it's going to be a busy 2023. Best of luck tomorrow, and best of luck for the rest of your SRO Esports campaign.
Thanks, Arjuna. Thanks for having me, mate. I appreciate you having me in here. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a lot of fun to talk with a driver that broke into the 159s at Bathurst, something that's only unofficially been done in the real world. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with another fascinating guest in the world of motorsports. Don't forget, this Sunday is a motorsports fans' heaven with so much racing going on. For the entire team at VCO, for Mike Yao behind the scenes, my name is Arjuna Kankipati saying so long for now. Enjoy this weekend. Race on. We'll see you next time.